Hi everyone, thank you for inviting me, it's nice to be here. So I'm going to give a quick presentation about Qualcomm's views on 6G right now. Of course, it's not going to be an overview of everything happening in 6G, but more a view of how we look at 6G and what we regard as important areas of 6G right now. So that's myself. Of course, many people know me, I guess, but even if you don't know me, it's not that important. First of all, what I wanted to mention, to give some context, of course, everybody knows Qualcomm, presumably here. We've been trying to look at the evolution of telecommunications and communication standards, including 6G, also from a computing lens. Qualcomm has been expanding its business in the areas of computing, and so we increasingly try to look at communication and computing together. So, this is a single slide where I try to outline our views on 6G, why 6G exists and what it delivers. And sometimes I call it also elevator pitch for 6G. So first of all, we regard 6G as part of digital infrastructure or evolution of digital infrastructure. That's not a terribly original view. Obviously, many other places around the world, many other geographies look at 6G as part of overall digital infrastructure. I think also a couple of the earlier talks were very interesting in that regard. So it's not just any longer about better spectral efficiency or better link budget or better run one KPIs, but it's also about how the communication network is useful as part of overall digital modernization of a country. So we try to look at the 6G technology standards from this lens. Of course, the radio aspect is important, and obviously 6G has to be better than 5G in the existing 5G bands and much better than 5G in new bands. This, of course, puts a big emphasis on spectrum availability, which is a big topic. We also think that with 6G, of course, you can do all the usual things better, but we have to try to expand into new services and capabilities in a reasonable manner, things that are reasonable. So here I'm going to talk about two areas, sensing and NTN, where really we believe there can be something new and also realistic from considering the overall business ecosystem of the industry. Clearly, AI will be pervasive in 6G, but it will be a tool, not like a feature per se. And then obviously, there are many things that have been happening in 5G that they will just continue into 6G, and then calling them 5G or 6G will be just a matter of marketing, and whether it's Open RAN and the Open Frontal or UAV and drones or massive IoT, it just becomes a matter of nomenclature. So that's our high-level view of 6G. I mentioned spectrum, and you can never talk about 6G in our view without looking at spectrum. Obviously, in our view, you must have new spectrum to deploy 6G, but unfortunately, not every country has a very clear plan right now for 6G spectrum, Korea being one of them, unfortunately. And so there are at least two parts of the world, US and Korea, that right now have a serious problem because they need to find spectrum for 6G, and it's just what it is. So I will not go into a lot of details. Also, a couple of areas of the planet are missing here, like Middle East, where there's a lot of interest. So eventually I need to create an updated version of this picture. But this is very, very important. This is very, very important, and it's also a call to action for the ecosystem in general to identify harmonized spectrum for 6G. I mentioned earlier, from a radio point of view, we have two big areas of focus, which is to try, which of course they are happening right now in 3GP, which is to try to do better than 5G in the existing 5G bands for people that want to deploy 6G in the same bands as 5G with soft refarming or spectrum sharing, as the kids call it today. And then to do much better than 5G in new bands. So these are two big areas of research from a radio point of view that we have. Wanted to talk quickly about sensing and NTN as two examples. So why we talk about sensing? Sensing, in our view, can give a new angle, very much in line with some earlier talks, because with sensing, the cellular network can also become a sort of a radar network and sensing network. And we can use, of course, larger bandwidth, better multi-antenna capabilities, and now the telecommunication network can also detect objects, and therefore the telecommunication network is no longer a communication network only, but is also a network that can provide new capabilities and that can also expand into areas of public utility or private-public partnerships. For example, there's been recently very public initiatives in this regard in both China and the US, where there's been interest from government or government agencies to try to leverage the public networks of operators to, in the future, evolve and have sensing capabilities that are beneficial in general. This is one application that we have already trialed ourselves, already using 5G Advanced. As I mentioned, of course, there's a continuity between 5G Advanced and 6G for drone sensing. So this we demonstrated, in fact, Mobile World Congress 2025. Drone sensing, actually, when we demonstrated this, it seemed more like a researchy area in looking for a problem, but in reality, there's a lot of applications for that. As unfortunately you can see in the news, there's been a lot of episodes, of course, of drones flying over airports, especially in Europe, of unknown origin, airports that had to shut down for hours because of drones were flying. And this has been really a call to action in various geographies, and you can go anywhere in the world, and all governments are interested in sensing capabilities to be able to detect flying objects. And now if you want to introduce a new infrastructure for sensing capabilities, that would become very, very expensive or very complex. So immediately the natural approach is simply to leverage the wireless infrastructure that already exists, which is the cellular infrastructure, and augment it and make it become a sensing infrastructure. So really there is something to be said here in terms of 6G. And again, I'm not saying anything revolutionary because this work is happening like many of the other work streams of 6G, but just wanted to put some emphasis on it because increasingly recently we see that as some interesting potential for 6G. To also create a new line of business or a new angle for cellular operators with public-private partnerships. Similar, but I think here I'm repeating a little bit what Nakamura-san talked about earlier, with sensing infrastructure, you can go into the areas of digital twin. Also in this case, we have done some demonstration here. I feel I would repeat a little bit what Nakamura-san talked about earlier. You can really create digital copies of complex environment, which allows them to have AI algorithms running in the background and therefore have better efficiency. And also this becomes a byproduct of sensing infrastructure. And with that, I wanted to switch to the other topic that also we think is at an inflection point in the 6G era and can bring something new, which is NTN. So why NTN? Of course, 3GPP has been working on NTN for many years, and in reality, for a number of years, people were very skeptical of the work on 3GPP NTN because, of course, people would say, well, there is a SpaceX, there is a Starlink, nothing will happen, everything will just be Starlink, and there is truth to that because, of course, the interest in in satellite is all driven by the incredible breakthroughs in reusable rockets from SpaceX. So it's absolutely true that without SpaceX, there would be no interest on NTN whatsoever. Because of course there's been a 50-year leap or 100-year leap in technology with reusable rockets. But of course, now because of that, it's much easier to launch constellations, and the inflection point that I'm talking about is because now all major players in the satellite industry, including SpaceX, they have expressed their interest, also in public, to migrate to 3GPP NTN. This could be, in fact, could be demonstrated. In fact, earlier, a colleague earlier was mentioning a satellite conference that happened earlier in 2025, where we also participated, and we showed how 3GPP NTN is superior to the unmodified approach for direct to cell. And eventually also SpaceX and other such companies, they've been convinced of that. So SpaceX will migrate to NTN. Another major operator like Viasat will migrate to NTN, also that is public. There are other major operators like Amazon or AST. They haven't said what they want to do, but of course they notice what is happening. And then also if you go to China, CSCN has been public that they will move from their previous DVBS approach to NTN, to 3GPP NTN. If you go to Europe, there is Iris Square constellation that is being planned based on NTN. There is another major player called Sateliot that also is going to collect funding to move to NTN. So it's really a big inflection point for NTN. So people are very aware probably that there are these two tracks. There is NB-IoT NTN, and which already has been commercialized, in fact. And then there is NR-NTN, and really is NR-NTN where we see this inflection point, which eventually will become a form of 6G. I think this will be an interesting example where names 5G and 6G will kind of merge or will become more a marketing exercise. But really, for all of these constellations that I mentioned earlier to be launched, it will take time, obviously, and by the time they are launched into orbit, it will be 2027, 28, 29, and then eventually everything will be called 6G, in my opinion. So even though they were based on an NR-NTN, it will be all called 6G. So this will be another big element of 6G. So a real fusion of terrestrial and satellite communications, which is being incubated in paper in the 5G era and will really happen in 6G. And then in that regard, I also wanted to mention another piece of work that has been happening in 3GPP, which also I think will come to fruition in the 6G era. Sometimes people don't talk too much about it, but there is a very significant project to also enable high quality voice calls over satellite, because obviously a big limiting factor for satellite communication to devices was perceived to be high delay, lower bandwidth, etc. So inability to have high quality voice calls. And which is true also now if you take any proprietary system like the ones provided by Iridium or Global Star, voice call quality is dismal, obviously. You know, there are some open source codecs, standardized codecs, but it's dismal. But 3GPP has now started a project, which will be another huge project, likely like EVS, IVAS, etc. This one is called the ULBC Ultra Low Bitrate Codec, which we at least from Qualcomm side, we strongly believe in this project, which actually we already have done our own research. We have demonstrated to ourselves that it's possible to have wideband quality with very low data rate using AI techniques also on voice codecs. And of course, we look forward bringing our technology in the context of this project in SA4. And so this I wanted to mention because it goes together to my earlier point in terms of inflection point for NTN. So it will be more pervasive to deploy NTN and also with voice calls. And anyway, with that, as I said, I go back to the earlier point. We really regard the 6G as part of modernization of digital infrastructure. And I hope this was useful to give a little bit of a perspective of how Qualcomm is looking at 6G these days. Thank you.